All right. Hello, 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 everybody. I am Rosalind Brown of Your Wealth Guidance, where we help Black women create their financial independence map to identify the tools for success so you can live life on your own terms. I want to thank you for tuning in today. Be sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification button so you never miss another great speaker. And today is a perfect day because if you don't know, today is Equal Pay Day. Um, and so this is not a day to celebrate. This is a day. Well, I guess I wonder why I woke up tired this morning. This is a day to be tired because this day represents the day where, as women, we have worked all of 22 and up until today of 2023 to equal what men have earned. You should be tired. My body was like, girl, you know what today is? And so, one of the reasons, there's a number of reasons why that pay gap exists. We can't tackle them all in a day. We can't tackle them all today at this moment, but we can do step by step on an individual level. And oftentimes we leave money on the table. When we look at surveys and so forth, how often women negotiate, how often women just say, thank you for this salary. I will go and work my butt off for it. We can't continue to do that. And so we have Tiffany Grant with us. She is a self proclaimed money nerd and super proud of it. She lives and breathes finances. After years of impromptu advice to family and friends, she said, why not start a blog? This way, all the knowledge she has on one online platform and reach even more people. And so she has taken that, built a podcast. She's going to tell you a little bit about that as well. But she also has a bachelor in business administration with a concentration in management, a master of business administration, accredited financial counselor, SHRM, and Lean Six Sigma yellow belt, and years of experience helping people like you. So at the end of the day, you're on all the different sides. So you kind of see because you didn't negotiate, this is why you don't have enough money.
Mhm.
But then you also see the other side of things as you're interacting with people and understanding the hiring and that process as people are trying to get you to convince you to come on board for less money.
Exactly.
And I know you wrote an article about it too, and we shared that with the ladies. But tell us kind of some of the first things to do to prepare for that type conversation.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I get super fired up about talking about this topic because, as women and of people of color, we do not negotiate as much as we should, unfortunately. And so I'm glad to be able to share this with your audience. So, the first thing that I tell people to do, first, you have to definitely speak up. Okay. So get out your mind that, money is taboo and you don't need to talk about this. You don't need to brag on yourself. All of that is false. Those are all false narratives. So, first and foremost, there's that. But second, you have to research, y'all. Definitely research before you go to any negotiation table. So, whether that be for a salary, whether that be for a car, a new car, or whether that's for, anything, a bill, make sure you know what your end game is, know what you're trying to accomplish, and know what people are being paid around you or how much people are paying around you if it's for a bill or something. So just make sure you do ample research before you even step to the negotiation table.
And then what are some of the resources that people can use to negotiate? I think that's usually people are like, well, they offered it. Obviously, that must be it. Thank goodness we're seeing states that are like, you have to give a range. And sometimes the range is, they're like 50,000 to 150,000. And you're like, am I worth 150? Or am I worth 52? And so how do you know where you fall even in some of these ranges?
Yeah, so luckily there are tools available. So like, you can go to PayScale or Glassdoor, and you can kind of see a ballpark range of what people with your expertise, your degree, your area, you can narrow it down pretty specific to see what people are getting paid. And when I tell people to use these tools, make sure that you're looking at titles, not just that specific title, but titles that could be similar. Because sometimes, well, I'll just be real, jobs have different names for the same thing. So, depending on where you are, like for instance, in HR, there could be a CHRO, which is like the Chief Human Resources Officer, or it could be Chief People Officer, or, so on and so forth. And so, try different search terms based on, what position you're going for. But websites like that are really helpful with at least getting a range of what you could be looking at. Now, I also say take it with a grain of salt because everybody's unique. And, a company, for instance, let's take tech companies, for instance, even though they've been struggling here lately, let's just say they like where they were, like high and mighty,
When
right? So,
everybody was getting
right.
200, $300,000.
Exactly. So you might see a tech company that's paying something that's way more than maybe a nonprofit, right? And so you kind of have to take that into consideration too. What is the industry that you're going into? Is it, public based or is it private based? What kind of services and stuff do they sell? Like if they're selling high ticket items, like for instance, I used to work at a software development firm, and they did software for like the police cars and stuff, and they were making bank, so of course they're able to pay their employees more. So you kind of have to take those things into consideration, but there are tools out there for you to utilize and use. And then like you said, which I'm glad you mentioned, that now you'll see on job descriptions a salary range, for instance, and that's been helpful for a lot of people because sometimes, trying to be modest, we'll go in and say, oh, I'll just take this. Maybe it's a couple of dollars more than what you're making now. But really, these jobs can be paying you so much more. So I don't know if you want me to get into tips.
Yes.
Or, okay.
Yes,
Because that
of
kind of
course.
segues into what my first tip, and that's never talk first. A lot of times you'll find on job applications they ask for, oh, what's your salary range, or in the interview they might ask that too. And the whole reason they're asking that is to see where they can peg you at. And so one strategy that I've used is, for instance, when I'm filling out the job application, I'll put zero, right? So when it asks me to type in the range, I just put zero. So that way they can't peg me at something and I can do more negotiating. Don't feel pressured to tell them your salary. You don't have to. There's nothing that says you have to tell them. And if you do tell them, just realize that now they know your cards, they know your hand. And so my thing is, I usually try to get them to speak first. And I've even been in situations where a recruiter has like each interview step of the interview process, I think it was like 3 times, she asked, oh, and I see, you put zero, but what are you looking for? How much do you make now? All of those types of questions are there to figure out how much they can peg you at. So my thing is, I never speak until they speak. And so in that particular situation, I was able to pretty much triple the salary that I was making, even though I would have left for like $2 more, if I would have talked. But I was like, I'm a hold out. And then they actually was like, oh, so we're thinking about this. And of course I'm drooling at that point, but I didn't want them to know that, because you, in negotiation, you still have to keep, it's kind of like poker, right? You gotta keep a poker face. So even when they sent me triple my salary, I'm like, oh, this looks good, but can you send me over your benefits? I want to make sure, the benefits package looks good. I want to look at my total rewards, and then I'll have a decision for you in a few days, that type of thing. So that way I can still keep my negotiation options open. They don't know that I'm really drooling over this offer. And I can negotiate higher or negotiate different benefits if I want as well.
And I think that's a good point. So to say you want to review it and give you a few days, I think people are like, if I
Just
don't
gonna
say
do it.
yes, they're gonna call somebody else.
Mhm.
How long is a good enough time? You can't be like, give me 30 days, but is it 24 hours? Is it 48 hours? Is it next week? What's reasonable?
Yeah, it depends. Because of course, different companies have different hiring goals and stuff that they're trying to hit on the back end that you don't know about, you know? And so you kind of have to gauge it like by how interested they seem. So in that particular situation, I knew they were super interested because I mean, I got through like 3 or 4 interview rounds. I met the guy flew in from a whole different state just to meet with me, you know, interview me and stuff like that. So I'm like, they're definitely interested in me. So I know that I have some wiggle room there. But like I said, it just depends. I would say give yourself a couple of days, you know, even to just think it over, because a lot of times we pull the trigger too quickly and we end up in situations where we're like, dang, you know, maybe the benefits weren't up to par, you know, from where you were, or maybe you didn't properly scope out like what the culture was going to be. Like, did you look up reviews? Did you see if you can talk to somebody that's already there that you may know, you know, that type of thing. And so I always tell people at least give yourself 24 hours. They're not going to pass over you in 24 hours.
Like next.
Right.
Just
So
so that might not be where you want to be. Yeah.
exactly. So, you know, just let them know, hey, you know, I'm interested in this offer, but I do need some time to look it over. Maybe you have other offers that you have to, you know, look over as well. I've also used that negotiation tactic. I've had like multiple offers going on at the same time. And the one that I really, really wanted, they did not respond to me yet. And the other one did. So I was like, hey, you know, I have another offer over here, but I really want to be with you all. So, you know, I need to know what the decision's going to be. And that kind of sped them up a little bit too. So, you know, you just kind of have to play it by ear.
And I think that's a really good point that sometimes people, especially women, like loyalty. So we say, all right, Tiffany, this is a great offer. I'm coming. And you're like, great, you're going to start on the 20th. And then the better offer comes in, and they're like, I mean, can I go back and say, I'm not starting on the 20th?
I mean, you could, but you also have to realize in career, I tell people this all the time: never, ever, ever burn your bridges unless you know you definitely like. I've seen people where I mean, environment was toxic; they'll never go back, but. You never know when you might come across those people again. And so, to give you a good example of that, um, when I was first starting in my career, I was a receptionist. So that was like my first level, right? And there was an HR person there and she treated me like crap. She really treated everybody like crap. She was like, I only do benefits. Like if anybody had any questions, she was like, I only do benefits. But
That
she
ain't my
was
job.
right, but she was the only HR person. So I'm like, who do you expect people to go to?
Say,
So
I don't know. Ask somebody else. Get somebody else to do.
that was her attitude all the time. So while I was there, I was like, well, dang, like this HR lady, she is not helpful at all. And that was the sentiment with everybody there. Now, fast forward, I'm sitting at a job in HR now, and her resume comes across my desk. My manager brought it to me. He was like, oh, I saw that you all worked at the same place at the same time. You know, what do you know about this person? And I was just like, mm-mm.
You better build her job description very, very specific because she ain't doing nothing else.
Yeah, I told him, I said, I was very honest. I said, look, when we worked together, I was a receptionist and she would always tell people that it was not her job. Like, whatever, you know, whatever they questions they had, whatever, it was not her job. So he was like, okay, in that case, we'll probably go ahead and skip over this one. So, you know, you never know when people might come around again. Cause I know she probably didn't even think that I was going to be on the other side of a hiring decision for her. And, you know, she would have never fathomed that. But here I am in this position. And so you never know. So I always tell people don't burn your bridges, you know, any means necessary to not burn your bridges because you never know when you might need it again.
And I think that's a really good point to make because it's hard. You're like, I hate these folks. I'm trying to get out of here. They are horrible to me. Um, Now, one thing, and you talked about, we understand the companies that are making, gobs of money. So we see you go into the parking garage and it's all the big cars, all the big brands, they got nice suits, everybody at a vacation home, that kind of thing. So okay, we understand they got money, they can pay us. But I think where a lot of women get caught up is when you are working in your passion, and it might not be the most, lucrative passion. Maybe you're working with kids, or you're working with homeless, or you're working with domestic violence victims and so forth. And so you're like, I would do this for free.
Currently, no, I'm just kidding.
And so you're like, how do I negotiate more money when I'm helping the world? Like, I'm changing the world, I'm making lives better. How do you find the courage, I think, to speak up and really advocate for yourself when you're supposed to be advocating for a whole nother population?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, we all struggle with that. I mean, even me, right? Because I'm like, ooh, financial education. I just want to educate the world. Like, I could do this. Like, I don't have to get paid, whatever the case may be. But I think what snapped me out of it was being an entrepreneur. And I said, because I've been full time since 2019, and I used to do free everything just because I wanted to help people. I wanted to get out there, all that stuff. And then the bills came, right? And then life goes on, and I still have a mortgage and everything. So what I've realized is you have to, one strategy, okay, let's talk about this. One strategy that I use is realizing that my time is valuable. And when I say that, because that sounds so cliche, but when I say that, I mean literally, like, if I want to buy something, I'm like, okay, how much time would that thing cost me in order to buy it? So taking your time and putting a financial value on it, has been really helpful. And when I look at things through that lens, I'm like, okay, Tiffany, if you do this free thing,
How much more stuff you gonna have to do?
right, how much time are you spending that could be used towards something that's going to be paid, So I kind of look at that, when I'm looking at not only being an entrepreneur, but when I was in corporate America too. So if there was a position where I'm like, okay, I can sit here and I can make, let's just say $20 an hour, right? And I'm doing a good cause, I'm helping the world, whatever the case may be. But I could also make $30 an hour helping the world and doing everything. So, you kind of have to look at that. And also, if it's something that's a passion project, right? Think about things outside of money, because obviously you're not doing it for the money anyway, right? Because you're doing the passion project. This is something that you love to do. And so if that's the case, start thinking outside the box on what you can negotiate for. So I've been in situations where I really loved the job. Like, the job, there was no issue, it was paid decent, wasn't great, but it was decent. I was able to survive. And I'm like, what can I negotiate here, which can get me to the next level? And so one time I negotiated for a title change. One time I negotiated for going to a conference, and they pay for the conference, personal development stuff. You can negotiate for that. And so think outside the box, other than salary. If salary is not a big thing for you, it doesn't have to be like, don't feel like, oh, I got to make more money. I got to make more money. I got to make more money if you really don't.
Now, don't go without paying your bills. Now,
Right,
don't
right, right,
don't.
right. Let's be
Like, I'm
clear.
gonna, I'm gonna eat ramen for the next 3 months, but I'm serving a cause.
No, 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 no. Let's be clear. If your bills,
Pay
if
your
your
bills.
bills are paid, and you really don't need extra money, everybody loves money, but if you don't need it, then see what else you can get from the company. A lot of times they like to do, personal development stuff. Maybe you want to go back to school. Maybe they can be flexible with the schedule. Maybe they can help you pay for the school. There's so many different things that you can bring up and discuss that a lot of people don't, or a lot of people have those benefits available and don't take advantage of them. And so I would definitely start there for sure. If money is not a big thing for you, if it is a big thing for you, just have the conversation. It never hurts. Like, the worst they can do is say no. Okay. And if they say no, then it's like, okay. Like, it's not the end
Okay.
of the world.
And I think that's a really good point, because a lot of times on the salary side, you may be like, I don't know. I don't know what to say. I don't know if I'm worth more. But I think even understanding like the value of a title. So some people
Mm.
are like, why would I change my title? I am, head people person or whatever that might be. What is it? What is the value in requesting a different title?
Oh, so okay. Let's go back to the example where I tripled my salary, right? And so at the job that I was at before I got that job, I was an HR assistant. Okay. So as an HR assistant, I couldn't get the certification that I wanted because you have to have certain titles in order to get that certification. And an assistant wasn't one of them. And so I was like, okay. So when the time came up for me to ask for more money, they were like, well, we don't have it in the budget right now, so on and so forth. So I said, okay, that's fine. Can I have one of these titles? And I had a list of titles that they could choose from, because you have to also remember that people, like, decision fatigue is real, right? So the easier you make it for people, that's why I say do your research, come with all your data, everything, because the easier you can make the decision, the more chance you have of getting it, right? And so when I already came with my research for the new money, that was like my first thing. But then I had a plan B, and I came with my research for these different titles that I wanted. And so I was like, okay, if they say no for this, I know I can fall back on this. And it's going to be real hard for them to say no on this, because it's literally just a type and an enter button. It's
There's no
not that
money.
difficult, right? So, I tried for the money first, then I tried for the title. Now, what that did for me, so I went from HR assistant to HR specialist. Now, you might be like, okay, Tiffany, like, that doesn't even, like, it's not like you went to like CHRO or VP or something or whatever. But what that did for me was that opened up the door for the next opportunity. So I wasn't just thinking about that job, I'm thinking long term. Where do I want my career to go? So that's another tip I also tell people, is to make sure you know where you're trying to go. Like, what goals do you have for your career? So at that time, I wanted to be VP of HR. So I'm like, okay, what comes after HR assistant? Maybe something like an HR specialist or something like that. And then HR business partner. So when I got the triple the salary offer, that was for an HR business partner. If I was HR assistant at my current job, they wouldn't have even looked at me for the HR business partner thing. And so that's the power of just a title change. It can open up way more doors, if that's something that you're trying to go for.
And especially now.
Mhm.
So, I think a few months ago, a year ago, people were talking about how much, they're like $50,000 raise, $100,000 raise, all this stuff. And now we're hearing about layoffs and so forth. And so it's not that raises aren't in existence anymore. We just might not be seeing the same kind of robustness of a raise. But I think that's a good thing to think about in terms of, okay, what's the backup?
Mhm.
So if it's, you talked about the title, what are some other things that, all right, if it's not money, what can I get today? Like, you need to walk away with something today. What are some of those other things other than that actual raise?
Yeah, so we talked about title. Benefits are a big one that you could definitely negotiate for more. So, like, let's say, for instance, if they're like, we will sponsor you to go on a conference. You could do one conference a year, let's say that, right? If you see another conference that's related to your job that you really, really want to go to, ask for it. You never know what they'll say. And so it really depends on what people are interested in, what they're trying to accomplish. Maybe it's somebody mentioned vacation days. You can negotiate for that as well. And a lot of people don't know that. They're like, well, it says I get 2 to 3 weeks, and that's it. But if you are a really good employee and they have some wiggle room, there's times where you can potentially get extra vacation days, and other people might not know about it. So just ask for whatever it is you want. It's going to be really unique to that person, but just ask for what you want, whether it be the title, whether it be benefits, whether it be more money, whether it be I don't know, help with your student loans. You never know. They could potentially help with that, but a closed mouth doesn't get fed. And if you don't speak up for yourself, then nobody else is going to do it.
And I think that's one of the points, because people know. So if you're out there in the job market and you're looking, yes, you're about to negotiate your salary. But here you are, you've been with this company 4 or 5 years, you've gotten your 1% for the last few years, not much has changed. And you're like, but I can't start asking for a whole bunch of stuff now. What can they start asking for now? How do you get the confidence to say, I know I've been sitting over here happy with my little salary and y'all ain't did much, but how do I ask for more?
So here's a strategy that I like, right? And I did this every single year when it was time for your review and your salary increases. But make a list, like as you go throughout the year, make a list of all of the things that you've accomplished in your role that contributes to the company's bottom line. And once you do that, it does two things, right? So the first thing it does is it builds your confidence. You're like, oh, as a result of my work, the company made an extra $1 million this year. They wouldn't have had this if it wasn't for me, that type of thing. And then also it allows you to get the data you need to communicate that value to your employer. And so that's one strategy that I use that definitely built up my confidence to ask for more, because I'm like, I made you all more money. Like I definitely deserve more. And so that's one strategy that I like to use, is just to have like a little brag thing. And that's another thing too. A lot of people are, in society, we're told, oh, don't talk about yourself. Oh, be humble, be modest, that type of thing, especially women too. But if you don't talk about yourself, if you don't let it be known what you've contributed or accomplished or what have you, then who's going to do it for you? Absolutely nobody. I learned this when, like, my first job, I didn't do that. And they were like, oh, you do great. Here's your, whatever the standard raise is, and go on about your business. And I'm like, well, if I did great and I don't have any constructive criticism, like no negatives or anything, then, like,
I'm like, well, you didn't ask for nothing, so you're not getting enough.
exactly. So, I used to tell people all the time when I was in HR, which I probably shouldn't have because I'm supposed to be working, on behalf of the company. But I used to tell people, like, I've never seen a manager ever in my HR career tap somebody on the shoulder and tell them you deserve a raise today. It has never, ever, ever, ever happened. And so, how do you get that to happen? You have to bring it up yourself. And if you have the data to show and to prove, the chances of you getting it goes, off up the like out the roof, and so that would be my biggest tip, is just to start collecting that data, so that way you know what you contributed, and then you can communicate that to your manager.
And the Mia 2000 or 203 talks about vacation days, and that's a big one. Because sometimes it can be because you got something going on and you're just gonna be short. And I've been lucky, because sometimes it's like, girl, just go ahead, don't even put nothing in, just just go ahead. And that might be something that you're like, I was trying to go to my family reunion, and I didn't think about the fact that I also wanted to go on vacation, and this vacation and that. And so those are things that are like small that, I mean, a good manager might be like, listen, I know I ain't got no money for you. Like, I know budget tight. Just go ahead. Like, let's not even make it complicated. I think that's a really good point to make, because sometimes we don't even think about it. And it might mean, especially with a larger organization, it might be like all different levels, when they could just be like, just be gone. enjoy, have fun.
But you don't know until you open your mouth. Like you have to ask. And that is the biggest drawback for us as women, as people of color, is that we don't ask. And sometimes it's just as simple as that. And just to give you a quick real time example, one of my friends, they need to go to their home country because their dad passed away. And so, typically they give 3 days bereavement. And I was like, well, just ask and see if they can give you a little more since you have to travel out the country. Lo and behold, he can get like a week, So you just have to ask. A lot of companies do have wiggle room. I will say though, with vacation days, those are still kind of tied to money on the back end. So, it depends, but it could be possible that you can get those too.
And I know some people, when they think about negotiating their salary, they're not going to all the sites. They're not going to Glassdoor, pay scale. What they out there doing is interviewing. And they like, listen, ABC company said they'll give me more than y'all. Now, once they pull that, can they stay where they are? Like, is it wise to say, so if they say ABC company will give me 10,000 more and they like, fine, we'll give you 11,000 more. Should they stay or should they go?
Okay. So here's the thing.
They're like, look here.
My thing is, you never want the left hand to know what the right hand is doing, right? So you don't want to show your, like, if you go to your employer and you say, hey, I've been looking for a job, this is what they've been giving me, that signals to the employer, like, this person does not want to stay here. Like, this person is out looking for jobs. They are not
They
here.
were not sick last Tuesday.
Right? Like this might be their last day. Like, and that's how employers start thinking when you say stuff like that. So my thing is, if you are looking for a job while you're employed, don't tell your employer that. And also, another thing to be aware of is if you do put in your notice and then your employer's like, oh, we can match that, or we can, give you a little more than that. For me, that's a red flag because my thing is, if you knew what my value was, why didn't you pay it? And usually employers that do that, the employee doesn't stay long anyway after that. Even if they do accept the offer, they'll still be looking, they'll still, go after some time. So for me is a pointless exercise on both sides of the coin. But if you are ever offered that, I mean, you have to do what's best for you. But in my opinion, that's a red flag because I'm like, if you knew what my value was, then why didn't you give this to me when I was here? Like, why did I have to go to a whole nother job,
They
put in my 2 week
recognize what's
notice?
there.
And now all of a sudden you like, oh, here's the extra, I don't know, $5,000 that we could have gave you when you was here. Yeah,
We
for me,
found
I'm
that under
like,
the sofa.
yeah, for me, I'm like, no, you can keep it. I'm gone.
I think that's a really good point because I think it's a mistake that some people make. They're like, I'm just going to keep going out here looking for a job. And then I'm going to let y'all know I found something. And they're like, we got it. We can do it. We can do the same thing they doing over there.
Yeah, for me, that's a red flag. And I've been at companies where, like for instance, my manager did that to people. Like they did the counter offers and stuff. And for me, I'm just like, now this person is looking for a job, and now you counter offering them. Even if they accept it, I give it maybe like
Because now
six
they like, I
months.
can go out here and negotiate even more.
We're honestly, really, what I've seen before in my career, I've been at jobs where people would quit just to come back to get a raise because they knew that's how people got raises at that company. They would quit, stay gone for a little bit, and then when they came back, they would get even more
Way more
money.
money, which is crazy. Now, we're in this moment where we're hearing about layoffs, we're hearing about downsizing. I think I just read something about, I think it was Meta, they're doing another 10,000 layoffs. And so if we are seeing people around us lose their job,
Mhm.
I think that can make you even more like, all right, I'm just happy to be here. I'm just happy I wasn't in the number.
I'm so happy to be here.
Just happy. And so now, review time comes around and you like, thank you, manager, for keeping me on board. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to show you I'm worthy. And they're like, thank you. and everybody just goes back to their desks. Should you still be negotiating in this time period because you're like, I saw all my work besties pack up
So,
their little box.
so keep in mind, okay, so you hear a lot about layoffs and stuff going on, most of them in the tech industry. Keep in mind that's only one industry. In the grand scheme of things, unemployment is super low. So a lot of companies are fighting for people right now. I'm on the board for a local company. I don't want to give too much information, but I'm on the board for a company, and they're like, we need to throw more benefits, we need to throw more pay, we need to do this, so now is really the time. Like, if you were thinking about making a change, actually this is probably one of the best times to do it, because overall unemployment is really low. Now, the reason the tech industry, now I'm put on my money hat real quick. um, the reason the tech industry is going through such a drastic change is because you have to realize when COVID times were upon us, everybody was at home. Everybody was using more technology. People were needing this stuff more. Now that the outside is open again, they don't need this stuff as much. And so they're not on this stuff as much. And so now all that hiring and stuff that the tech industry did back then, now they're having to let go of those people, or some of their workforce, because now it's not making as much money as it did. And so that's kind of why the tech industry is kind of unique right now, is because they ramped up a lot during COVID. Now they're having to ramp back down to maybe their pre-COVID numbers, or maybe even less. And so all of that to say, if you think you deserve more money, ask for it. It doesn't matter. I mean, now, okay, don't get me wrong, because then I'll be contradicting myself. It does matter for timing. But look at your company. Don't look at different industries and try to compare it to where you work, because it might not be the same situation. So look at your company, look at maybe your company's competitors and see what they're doing, and then kind of gauge it that way. Because just because you see, Meta and some of these big names laying off people and they're getting a lot of publicity, that doesn't mean that it's the norm of what's going on right now.
I think a really good point, especially as women. I will say in my entire professional career, there is always a woman, and I'll say, I'm gonna talk about my specific situation. It is always a Black woman who has worked there forever, who is in a support role, who know everybody, everything. They know all the records from way back when and why we do it this way and all that kind of stuff. But they just can't seem to get from that support role. So people are like, thank you, administrative assistant. I know you're a sales assistant too. I know you do all of our documents. You create, you innovate, you do this. You have come and stood the test of time. But yeah, no. We're not doing that. How do you negotiate yourself out of, especially some of these more service roles, to get into some of the higher paying roles, or to, take your boss's job, that kind of thing?
I will be honest, and this is just in my experience, staying at the same company and doing that is difficult. Just because everybody knows you for that thing, right? And so, for instance, I tell people all the time, if you want to know anything about a company, go to the receptionist. She knows, or he knows everything. Like, they know everybody and everything. And so, being in that role when I was like fresh out of college, if I would have stayed at that employer, the only trajectory I would have had was receptionist. Maybe I would have moved up to an administrative assistant, maybe for a handful of project managers or something, but that would be it for me. And so you kind of have to look at the landscape. And another thing, like, usually receptionists, they stay forever, and they they stay in that role, because as a receptionist there's really no next level. Like, there's just your receptionist.
Stay right there. That's your
Right. And so it's very difficult in those situations to make those major career leaps or changes or things like that. And so what I did was I used that receptionist role to figure out what position I would want to do. So I knew everybody, I knew everything that they did. And I'm like, like, what looks interesting? And then I took that information and applied to a different company to do it. And so, you kind of have to, it's kind of difficult in administrative work because that was what I wanted to do. Like when I was fresh out of my bachelor's, I was like, ooh, I just want to be executive assistant for a CEO. And that's where I want my career to go. And then I became a receptionist and I said, oh, so this is what this is. I'm like, I don't
That's
know if
what
I
it
want to do
is.
this. So I was like, okay, let me use this position to my advantage. Let me get some of the skills, let me get, the people skills, kind of learn about what other people were doing. And then I applied somewhere else. So it's going to be really difficult once people peg you for something to get out of that role if you stay at the same company. I'm not going to say it's impossible because I've seen it done, but it was very rare that it happened. So I don't know. My suggestion is, I mean, unless
Leave and
you
come
are in love,
back.
unless you're married to the company and you're in love, maybe use that support role to see what the other positions are and then maybe apply somewhere else. I think that would be your best bet, but not to say you couldn't. I think if you wanted to get the conversation started, maybe go to your manager and say, hey, you know, I'm thinking about my career. I want to take it to the next level. What are some things that I should be doing or you think I should work on so that way, I can make it to this next level or this next position. And so that way it puts you on their radar that you are looking to advance. And then it also gives you feedback on what you can be doing to advance. And and also I will say, if it's a different department that you're trying to go to, talk to the manager of that department too. So maybe say, hey, I am in this role right now, but I really like what you all are doing. What do I need to do, or what do I need to work on, or what should I be studying, or, what should I be doing right now in order to step into a role over here, and let them give you that feedback. And not only does that help you to let you know what you need to do, it also shows them that you're taking the initiative, you're taking your career into your hands, and that you're interested. I've seen people do that and make transitions to different departments because they went to the manager and said something. So I would just, whatever your career goals are, just let it be known and to the stakeholders, and then go from there.
What if you messed up? So, all right, you did some Googling and you were like, okay, I think I deserve to be paid X. And then you sit down, and this actually happened to a friend of mine. She said they got like quarterly bonuses, and the bonus was as a percentage of their pay. So on a little spreadsheet, it says your pay times X equals bonus. And they accidentally scanned it. Instead of sending it to this department, they sent it to all those people. So they actually saw this person makes this much, this person makes this much, this person makes this much. And so what do you do? Something like that happens, and you be like, wait, or maybe not that extreme. That extreme makes it a little easier to be like, hold on, y'all shorted me 20,000. But like not that
Just a
extreme.
little bit.
But you find out that you were happy to get 10 and you should have got 20. How long do you have to wait to rectify that? Can you be like, hey, actually, I know we just talked last week. Can we talk about this again? Or do you need to wait 6 months or a year? How long should you wait between that conversation?
Mm. So that depends, right? And that's why I say go to these conversations prepared. So you should be doing all this research, at least as much as you can before you get to the table. So that way you don't have to double back and be like, wait,
Like,
actually, I
oh,
meant, this is not what I
oh no,
meant.
you
This
gave
is
me
what I
that
meant.
too easy. Like you would like, good, don't take that.
Right. And I mean, another negotiation tactic is to go in a little higher than what you would want, just so they have room to negotiate down. I've used that as well, but if you need to renegotiate after you just negotiated, I would wait at least 6 months, just to kind of feel it out a little bit. Because if they just gave you a raise, depending on the company, depending on the situation, it just had to go through a whole process, right? And so now you're like, oh, but wait, actually, I meant this. Can you go ahead and up it a little bit more? Now everybody has to go through this whole process again. Which I
I
mean, for you, right?
would.
For you, it don't really matter, but for them, they're like, I just went through this process, and you're not happy
And you
again.
like
Like,
it.
so I would wait a little bit. I wouldn't just like in a week double back. If you do now, okay. Here's another thing, it is not against the law anywhere for you to talk about your salary to your employee, to your coworkers and stuff. You can do that, and that's protected by law, like federal law. So the only reason companies don't want you to do that is because situations like that, because then it'll be like a bank run. Everybody's like, I need more, I need more, I need more. Right,
And when
right.
they
So
try to
really,
recall the message, they're like, I already printed. Change this
right.
stuff.
That's a huge mistake. But yeah, so that's the only reason companies don't want you to do that. But even if you did, it's protected by law. And so don't, like, if you have a friend that's, of course you have to play it by ear. But if you have like a friend in a department that you're interested in and you're like, how much you get paid, or kind of have that conversation, and you can kind of get an idea. And another thing, like for instance, I tell my, because I teach freshmen at a university, I tell my freshmen is to talk to people that work at the companies that you want to work at and just do an informational interview. So just be like, hey, I saw that you worked here in this position, this role. I just wanted to get a little more information about you, about the company, about how you, got there, whatever, whatever. And just kind of feel it out and see what they say. Like if they're like, oh yeah, and the salary's great and the benefits are great, that type of thing, then you know that you have some wiggle room there, to kind of up it a little bit. So when I say do research, don't just go through the traditional means, like do extensive research on, and that could be interviewing people, that could be talking to different people, just to see what you could be potentially working with before you go to the table. Because once you pull the trigger, it's going to be real hard to pull the trigger again so soon.
Like, hold up. And I would say too, I remember talking to someone and I would say ask for a range. So you would say, what do typically people get paid in this role? What is the range? Because people might not want to tell you what they make, but they'll tell you like a little bit lower than what they make and a little bit higher. Because they just assuming that's the range. Range might be, $100,000 range. But because I was talking to someone and he says the pay is really good. And we kept talking, and finally he said what the pay was, and I was like,
It's
"Pay?"
relative, yes. It's
Like, dang,
very
what you was
relative.
making before? And I think that's, I always say expensive is not expensive if you got a whole bunch of money,
Mhm,
and cheap can be expensive if you ain't got no money.
mhm,
And so even just to say, hey, what do HR specialists make here, like on average? And then
mhm.
somebody will say, they're going to tell you a little bit less than what they make and a little bit more than what they make. So they're going to let you know they somewhere in between, but and the people might be more comfortable with that opposed to how much you make.
Exact amount, right. Mhm.
I think they're
Very
like,
good
why you
point.
in my business? But you can say, what do people? I'm really interested in.
Mhm,
What's the range? What do people typically make? And
mhm.
they'll give you a range. But when it's like, oh no, they pay good. You're like, good. Like what's good? And
Was good.
you know, that's
That's what I said.
good.
That's what I said, you kinda gotta feel that one out. But that's a good point, and I like that idea to ask for a range because people are more comfortable, talking in non-absolutes. Like, if they can just be like, "Oh, yeah, it's, 10 to 50,000." No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. And so they make somewhere in there, but they're not telling you I made 15,000. You're like,
Mhm,
15, how
mhm.
you know that? I think that's a good thing. And yeah, watch your face because you might be like, I ain't interested about
Right.
I ain't interested.
On that thought, never mind. But yeah, that's a really good point. Asking for ranges would be, and even when you're talking to employers too, asking for the range. Like now, a lot of companies are putting it on the job description, but not all are, depending on where they're based out of. So, I mean, it's within your right to ask, well, what's the range? And if they be like, well, how much you make? Just be like, that's negotiable. So what's the range?
And I think that so that would be great to give some tips because, like you said, you go through the interview process. It's the first thing on the application. They like, yeah, we ain't asking, you ain't got to tell us, but you got to put something in this box. You like something. Yeah, I like the zero. I almost feel like you should do like the Price is Right and be like $1.
Yep. So
One.
sometimes I've run into applications where I can't put zero, so I'll just put one because just so I can get to the next screen.
And they're like, this must be a typo. What is it that you make here? And it's like the over and over and over again. And I think people feel pressured to give something. What are some of the good responses to not answer that question?
Yeah, so what you have to realize is the majority of us, we talk ourselves out of opportunities. So we just talk, 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 talk. Maybe they're like, oh, how much do you make? And you're like, at first you start off with, oh, well, it's negotiable. And then later in the conversation, you're like, well, if I get at least such and such and such, so you're not giving what you make, but you're like, this is how much I would love to have. You're still giving away information. So my thing is you have to be comfortable with silence. That's a big thing. A lot of people feel like they have to fill the air with talking all the time, and you really don't. And a lot of times that gets you, not what you want. And so I've been on phone calls where the recruiter's like, okay, so how much? And we're like in a stalemate. And I am so comfortable with just sitting there in silence because like once they ask the
Exactly.
question and I say it's right, if they ask the question and I say it's negotiable, or I say, I really don't need to disclose that, I would like to know what your range is, and we can keep we can keep going. Or a lot of times it's just silence because they're waiting for me to say something, and I'll just sit there, even in person, I'll just sit there and just like so it gets some getting used to, and you have to get comfortable with doing that. But I will say it has been helpful in my negotiations is to make sure that I don't feel like I need to fill the air with just talking. Another thing I will say is if they ask you, well, how much are you looking for? I always say it's negotiable. That's like my favorite word to use. It's negotiable because that's not giving away anything. That's telling them, look, just give me what your range is, and then we can talk about it. Let's negotiate about this. So that's one of the terms that I always use. Let me see. If they ask, how much are you currently making? You can politely just say, I don't feel like disclosing that. You don't have to. It's not a law anywhere that says you have to tell them how much you make. You absolutely don't. And actually, when they're doing the referral checks and things like that, we reference checks, sorry, your current employer is not allowed to give how much you make either. And so really when they're doing the reference checks, the only thing we can really give them is, yes, this person worked for us and these are the dates they worked for us. And that's it. Like we don't get into anything like, oh, and in their file they had this and they did that, and, all of this stuff. Yeah, no, we don't do all of that. We just give, your start date, your end date, and that's it. And a lot of times I've been in situations where they tried to pressure me for information, like as HR, they're like, oh, and what do you know about this person? I'm like, I have the dates. That's
I
all
know
I
they
have.
started and I know their last day was this.
Right. So anyway, I say that to say don't feel like your old employer is going to give that information either. And so recruiters are really in the dark until you say something. And so that's why it's so important to not be the first person to speak. The first person to speak loses in negotiation. So always remember that. If they say what their hand is, they've automatically lost because now you can, go ahead and negotiate against that. If you say what you want, then you've already lost because now they've pegged you at something where they could have really offered you 20,000 more. Who knows? And so, those are some things to think about.
I think that's a really good point. And I think so. One thing I've heard is So they'll say, can you provide your W-2? So for people who have like, I make 150,000, and they like, show me.
I've never heard of that. And if that is the case, you do not have to give that.
I think it's like definitely. I think it's industry specific. But folks like,
Okay.
let me see what you're talking about. Let me see what you're looking like.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
interesting. Red flag. No, I'm just kidding. No, I don't know, industry specific stuff, but that's interesting. But like I said, legally, you don't have to give them any of that information from previous employment.
I think that's always good because I think sometimes you give too much. You know,
Hmm.
folks like, why are you looking or why are you leaving? Like, because I hate them people and I've been trying to get another job and trying to get, and they don't want to hire nobody. They don't want to promote me. And they like, yeah,
And
thank you for coming out.
exactly. And let me bring that up too, because that's another thing where people go wrong is that they start bad mouthing their previous employer. And so for the employer, what that says to us is, oh, so they're bad mouthing this. If things don't go their way here, then they're going to bad mouth us too. And like you said, maybe that's not the person that we're going to, hire on. And so even if your working conditions are horrible, I always tell people in the exit interview, don't give too much. Like if you want to say something, brief, keep it real, like light. Like don't go into like
Is it
all.
even worth the exit interview? I'm like, child, y'all ain't
Honestly,
here.
honestly, okay, so it depends on the HR department, but I will say as an HR person myself, at my companies when I was there, I really use the exit interview information. And if somebody like put some stuff on my radar, I followed up on it, I talked to the managers about it, that type of thing. Now, of course, we also have to aggregate that data too, a lot of times. And so it may not just be what you said, but maybe like the three people before you and you said the same thing. So now I'm going to the manager, like, this has been a situation, that type of thing. So I did use that information, but do all HR people do? No. But some do, some do. So I always tell people if there was something that was really horrible and it's something that, is important even after you leave, then maybe leave it with HR. But if it's not going to matter, like let's say if it was like something personal, between you and your manager or whomever, that stuff is no point in talking about it because you're leaving. And at the end of the day, if it was an isolated incident, then it was just isolated. And you never know if you need to go back to the employer again. So a lot of times when I'm leaving a job, I'll do my 2-week notice. I keep it very broad. I just say, I've was able to get a new opportunity. I weighed the cost and the benefits, and this looks like a really good position, blah, 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 blah. And I don't say anything about like the real reason I'm leaving because usually,
I've been
usually,
hating y'all for a year, and I didn't care if they gave me $2. I was
right. Usually people don't leave companies, they leave managers. And so I'll just keep it real basic, real broad. That's my 2-week notice. And then if I do get an exit interview, which in my career I usually did, I'm just like, everything was great. I appreciated the opportunity. If there was something business related that they could improve, I might leave that with HR. But if it was something between me and my manager or, me and another employee, and that's why I'm leaving because, these people get on my nerves, like none of that is necessary.
they kept touching my hair and saying, "How is it so curly?" Like,
Yeah, none of that. None of that. If it's something that could be detrimental for business, and it's up to you. You don't have to leave them with anything. This is a voluntary thing. If you want to decline the exit interview, you can. And I don't think people realize that too. Like, if you don't want to give your thoughts, you don't have to. You can just say, you know what? I don't really want to do an exit interview. I'm ready to start my new position, but thank you so much for the offer, that type of thing. That's totally within your right to do so as well.
I think that's a good point to make because sometimes people like,
You feel
Um,
obligated.
yeah, I hate it here. That's why I'm leaving. I just hate it. Especially if it was something small.
Mhm.
I think sometimes that might even be the moment where you realize if you left for $5,000 and they like, we could have gave you that $5,000, or in today's day, you might be leaving because they said you got to come back into the office, and they like, I mean, we could have let you work from home or something like that. It might be the awakening for you to even realize you didn't ask for something,
Mhm.
or you didn't ask the right person for something. So maybe, your boss said, no, it's not possible, but you could have taken it somewhere else and said, actually, you could have got special permission because of the level
Mhm.
or how long you've been at the company or whatever it is. So sometimes that's just the awakening point
Mhm.
of
Absolutely. And that's another thing. That's why I always tell people, please just ask. Like, you never know. If you want to work from home, ask. Be like, look, I really got used to working. No, I'm just kidding. Don't say I really got used to working at home during COVID. I want to go back. But, if you have a real business case to why you would want to work from home, then bring that up. And, I always tell people when you're negotiating for stuff like that, make sure you tie it back to the business. Like, how is this helping the business? So, like, maybe you can get creative. I would like to work from home because I know that, when I work from home, I'm fully focused. I'm able to get more done, whatever. Like, make sure whatever you negotiate for, whatever it is, make sure you tie it to the business somehow and how it helps their bottom line. That's a really good negotiation tip, too, because if you can do that and they can see how it's going to help the business, then they're more apt to say yes too.
especially if they're like, we out of office space. You like, go on, give it to somebody else. I'm packing up today. Give it to somebody else. Give it to the new
Right.
girl. She needs to meet people.
Sweet. No, I'm just kidding. um, but yeah, at the bottom of all of this though, is just to ask. The worst they can say is no, and if they say no, then you just go back to doing what you were already doing. So it's really nothing that you're losing with making sure that this stuff is on the table, making sure people know what you're trying to accomplish. Have some career goals in mind. So if you're ready to negotiate, you want to negotiate for something, whatever it is, make sure you're doing it for an end goal. Like, there's something that you're trying to get towards, because if you can communicate that as well, they may be more apt to help. So like, if you want to, like, for instance, when I was negotiating for the title and I was like, hey, I want to get this certification. And I can't get the certification with this current title that I have. So can you pick from this list of titles? And it just made them more apt to do it. So if they can see your vision as well as you can see your vision, then it's easier to negotiate for whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish.
And I got this question yesterday for people who are at they talk about, the salary bands. And so sometimes people say, I can't give you a raise because you're at the
Mhm.
salary band. So you're at the top level. So maybe you are the person that know everything. You've been there the longest. You've been there for 20 years. And they like, listen, you at the top. What
Mhm.
does that person do?
You want the real answer? I might be the wrong person to ask because my resume is very, very long. But the best way to give yourself a raise is, of course, to go to another company. But I'm also a millennial, and that's just what we do. So,
It wasn't working
um,
out.
but
No hard
outside of
feelings. It wasn't working out.
right, but outside of that, though, like, if you're at a company and you are at the highest pay range, they really, because that's true to an extent. As HR and like the compensation specialists and things, like, that's their job, is to figure out, okay, what's the industry doing? How much can we afford? Like, there's a lot of moving pieces in the background to how they come up with these ranges. Like, a lot of times, unless, they don't know what they're doing, a lot of times it's not just out the sky. Like, it's real ranges and there's reasons behind these ranges. So The ranges are real. And depending on the company, I've seen them have a little wiggle room with, bumping people up just a tad bit more. But if they say that you're at the highest of your range, then there's probably not much wiggle room there to get as high as you probably want. And so if you're in that situation, I would suggest looking at what the next level might entail or what the next level looks like, or moving to a different company. If you want to keep the same title, doing the same thing, you might just have to move on, honestly, because if you're at the highest of the range, then they may be able to give you maybe a couple thousand more, but that's about it. Usually, it's going to be
Just
really
the
hard to
best
negotiate that.
receptionist they got at the highest range they got, and and that's gonna be that.
Pretty much. A lot of times, pretty much. Like, honestly, okay, let me kind of tell y'all how it goes in the background. So, HR department comes up with the ranges. It's up to the manager to figure out what they want to actually offer people based on whatever their budget is, right? And so, if your manager is saying, look, you're making, let's say the range is 50 to 80, you're making 80. I really don't, they don't have any wiggle room. It could be because the department doesn't have the budget for it. It could be because in the background, the range, they're not willing to pay higher than that because they know that they can get somebody maybe for the fit. Like if you decide to leave, they might can get somebody for the 50, 60, And so it's going to be really, really hard. I just say that to say it's going to be really, really hard to negotiate above a pay range if you're at the top at the same company. Now, if you go to a different company, which I would highly recommend, then
Your
it's
base
going to be,
might be different.
yeah, it's going to be, you have a lot more wiggle room. I've seen people, I've had clients where they've doubled, tripled their salary just because they left a position at a company to go to another one. And the same thing happened to me as well. So if money is important to you,
And money
and
is important.
and you're not really happy where you are, maybe it's good for the status quo, but there's no like oomph, like you just going and just going through the motions, and there's really no reason why, oh, I love this company type thing, then going to a different company might be the solution you need. Now, if you do have a good employer and you're like, oh, I love just working here because everybody's just awesome, and the benefits are good, the money is decent, I'm able to survive, then um you know you might there's really nothing to do, you just stick it out, I guess. But there is something to say about culture and making sure that the culture aligns. And so if you're in a situation like that and money's not really that big of an issue and you're at the top of the pay range, just realize that all the negotiation stuff is probably going to go out the window. Like it's probably going to be no point in negotiating anything higher, honestly. You might get a
Because
few
then it might be
thousand.
negotiating some of those other benefits, like the conferences, the
Yes.
certifications, to prepare you either for the next job or the
Mm-hmm.
next company. But
Right. But I will say, I'm not going to say don't negotiate at all. Try it because you never know. I always say, always ask. You never know. But I would say go into those conversations with a plan B and a plan C, because the chances are of you getting a salary range has kind of diminished a little bit. So just make sure you have a plan B and a plan C when you go into those conversations.
I think that's a really good point to make. I know we're right up against the hour. I
Yes.
think I got all the questions that folks sent in over the last couple of days. Now, any closing remarks as people are thinking, because now is the time, we are in the beginning of the year, you're prepping, you're getting your folder ready. You're doing your research. What are some of those things that get you prepared? So hopefully in 2024, equal pay date is going to be like January. Because child, working 2.5 extra months.
It's crazy.
And we
It's
already
crazy.
do more domestically too. So it's like, child, we didn't really work probably September.
And actually, I think Black women's equal pay day
Black
is
Women
somewhere
Day
around
is
there.
like September. Yeah.
Mhm.
I know the
So
same people that when it's like, I where, go ask the black woman, the older black woman who's been there forever. That's who you ask. She know.
Auntie, she, Auntie knows.
She know. I remember showing up and they were like, "You black?" I was like, "You black?" Like, girl,
Don't you love us? Because anywhere we go, like we always have like a little like microcosm of just us. It's just so important.
she gonna
Um,
give you a
so,
little something extra. She gonna come through for you. Go
mhm,
give you a couple tips about people. Like, listen, stay away
mhm.
from that.
But you know what? We're joking about it, but it's super important to build your network while you're at work, both within your job and outside of your job, because that's usually how you can get to the next level. Like I tell my students, it's not too much what you know, is who you know. And I've seen that played out so many times in HR, just giving y'all the back juice. I've seen that play out a lot of different times. And even in my career, that has played out. It wasn't what I knew, it was who I knew. Because whatever they have on the job description, you can learn it. Most times you can learn that stuff. They can train you on it, or you can learn as you go. And so, definitely build your network. Build your network with the aunties, with people that are around you, people that you resonate with. Build those connections, because you never know, those people might be able to help you get to that next level that you're trying to go in many different ways. So we're joking about it, but seriously, y'all,
And don't
build your
just go and
network.
try and find like all the senior executives. Like they talking to their admin when you leave, and you were like, "Admin, I'm just trying to see the senior executive." And then when you leave, they were like, "So what you think about her?" They were like, "I ain't
Mhm.
like her."
Look, y'all,
And I've
real.
definitely seen that, probably more so as folks are just joining, and some of the younger folks too. A lot of times with men, they be like, "I ain't come to speak to you." Oh, okay.
Look, Rosalind, I'm gonna be real with you. When I was a receptionist, the hiring managers would always ask me, "Oh, so what did you think about that person? How were they acting in the hallway? How did they treat you? That type of thing." So, if you are going for a position, treat your admin people right, because they actually have a lot of power behind the scenes.
Yes,
And
and I over and over and over, it'll be like, "No, I'm just trying to talk to so and so." It's like, the person who getting stuff done is the person who is here sitting in the office and knows stuff, and
mhm,
there's
mhm,
value there. And
mhm,
there's like, "No, I'm just trying to go see so and so." It's like, oh, okay.
mhm,
Don't
yep.
miss out on your blessing now. Just
Right. And same thing like with salespeople too. Like when the salespeople used to come in, I'd be like, "Oh, I really like this company because they gave me donuts," and or whatever. So to salespeople too, if there's any salespeople listening, make sure you treat your receptionists, your admin people right, before you get to whoever you really want to talk to, because a lot of times they access about you, and it could be good or it could be bad.
and that's how you get access and on the
Mhm,
calendar and all those kind of things. I think it makes
mhm,
a huge difference. And that gets you to the point where you can negotiate, where you can get to the next place, where somebody remembers your name who may not remember names of
mhm.
most folks. I think that is huge. That's a big, value of not just knowing your stuff, but knowing your people on top of knowing your stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I forgot the question that we were going for.
Oh, just any other tips? I know we're past the hour mark, but any other tips as people are getting started, especially things that they can do in the next, I always say immediate. So in the next 30 to 90 days, what can they do to prepare for these conversations, to initiate these conversations?
First thing is to know where you're trying to go, know what you're trying to do. And so if you don't have any goals like actually written down, like, people are like, "Oh, well, I know what I'm trying to do," and it's in their mind somewhere. And, when they tell one person, it's slightly different from when they tell somebody else, that type of thing. Actually write your goals down. So if you haven't already done that, definitely do that, and then kind of reverse engineer it. So that was one thing that my career coach had me do. And so that brings me another point. Have a mentor, have a career, coach or somebody in your corner that can help you kind of navigate as you need. And it doesn't matter how old you are, how long you've been at your company, whatever, you can always find a mentor or somebody that, is either at the level that you want to be at or maybe slightly higher than you. So that way you can kind of glean information. But she told me to write down what my ultimate goal was. And then we kind of reverse engineered that into my career. And so at that time, it was to be VP of HR. And so I'm like, okay, so what steps do I need to take in order to get to that? And that's how I came across, getting the job as the HR assistant, negotiating for the HR specialist, because I knew that could get me another step higher. And so knowing what your end goals are is super important, and having them written down. Like, there's power in writing stuff down. So you want to make sure that it's down somewhere that you see it every day. You know what you're trying to do, and then just reverse engineer it. Maybe you interview somebody that is in the C-suite already, and you're like, okay, how did you get here? And I will say, most of the time, in my experience, it was my people like that was helping me, try to navigate. Like, when I decided to get into HR, when I was in that receptionist role, the HR generalist that was there, not the one that didn't want to do
Like, hey, my
nothing, but
job.
they had hired someone else to be over her, and it happened to be a sister like me. And so she took me under her wing, and she would explain stuff to me, like why she would do certain things, and things she was doing around the office. And I was like, oh, I really like this position. This seems interesting. And so she kind of took me under her wing. So all of that to say, I wouldn't have been able to move as fast as I did in my career had it not been for having a end game in mind. And then also, I'm also put on my money hat, having my finances in order. Those two things combined, and you are unstoppable. You are unstoppable because you can make the decisions that other people won't want to make or can't make,
Yeah.
Yeah, so I will say those two things combined, I was able to go from HR assistant to HR business partner, which is a step below VP, in like 3 years or so. And that was like triple, quadruple from my salary from start to end. And so knowing that that's where I wanted to go, I knew the steps to get there, and having my finances in order, I could be like, okay, you all don't have any personal development opportunities. Okay, I need to go to the next. Oh, you don't want to give me. Okay, I need to go to that type of thing. So I would say that would be the thing to do immediately, and then do your research on how to get to that and what steps you need to take now to get there. So by the end of it, you should have, okay, this is my end goal. This is my baby step. This is my baby step. This is my baby step. And these are the things I need to do to get between those baby steps, if that makes sense.
Oh, I love it. I think that's really important. Having a mentor, having somebody who's there, or at least knows how to get you there, or introduce you to folks to get you there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the biggest thing is to dream. Like, sometimes we're content and we don't dream. I actually just finished reading a book. I posted it on my little book group. And it just talked about a young boy, and people were like, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to do? And he's like, I don't know. I'm just trying to make money, pay bills. And it's like, how many of us are in that space of, I'm trying to be great where I am, but we have to dream bigger so someone can get you to that next step. So definitely you can do the work to get to that next step. So if you aren't dreaming and putting something big, find a place to write it down. I got a board over here, my little whiteboard over there. So make sure you're writing things down, the things you're going to do in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. And you'll find yourself surprising yourself. You're like, dang, I'm supposed to do that in a year. And it's opportunity has already arrived because I put so many things into motion. So dream. I guess that would be my biggest thing. Is like, you're hoping for $2,000. Dream for 50.
A lot of times, and I mean, my career coach, because she's still my mentor in other ways, even though I'm not in corporate America. But every time we talk, she gives me assignments. And one time I was talking to her lately, and she was like, because she asked me a question, I gave her my answer. She said, You're not dreaming big enough. You're not thinking big." You're thinking too small. You still thinking too small. You're thinking too small, Tiffany. And so, a lot of times what we may consider, oh, like let's say for instance, we're currently making 2,000 a month and we're like, oh, it'd be cool if I had 2,500. A lot of times that's not big enough. Like, what do you really want? And I think getting down to what you really, really want. And a lot of times with my clients, I will do a strategy where I'll have them dream. Because usually people come to me and they're just, the sky is falling. Like their finances are all at a whack. People don't come to me when things are good. They come to me when things are bad. And so I'll be like, you know what? Let's just forget about that for a minute. Let's just dream. Like, what's the perfect life look like? Like, what house are you in? What car are you driving? What job do you have? Are you working a passion? What passion projects do you have, or what have you? And what that does, it gets you into the mind state of being creative. Because a lot of times when we're in a fight or flight, or we're in a situation where we're like, oh my gosh, I'm just thinking about how to put food on my table, what have you, we can't think creatively. So maybe there's something that you can negotiate for, but you're not thinking about it because you're like, well, if I could just get another $500 a month, I'll be good, because that'll give me enough money to put the food on the table. But really, if you could think creatively, you're like, well, I know I'm trying to get here. Maybe if I could just get this title change real quick, I can apply to another job for that title. And then that can actually give me like $2,000 extra a month.
Maybe
You
you can
don't
own a
know.
house, or
Exactly.
all the other things.
Mm-hmm,
Buy
mm-hmm,
the second home, retire early, send
mm-hmm.
your kids to school. Like, it's
So many different
dream.
things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
dream bigger. Whatever it is. And I think that's, having buddies, those accountability buddies,
Mm-hmm.
to be like, girl, that ain't enough. That
Mm-hmm.
ain't you just hoping not to bounce a check. That ain't enough.
Right. I know, and trust me, I've been there, but I know one thing that has helped me tremendously that my career coach told me when we first started working together. She said, you are only as good as your circle of five. So the circle of the five people that you spend the most time with, right? And so when I went through the exercise, I won't go into because we're wrapping up, but when I went through the exercise and everybody was making how much I was making or less, she's like, well, how do you plan on getting to where you're trying to go if everybody around you is where you are? You need to start opening up and just even interacting with people that are in a higher bracket than you are now. So that way, you start just having different conversations. Like the conversations are just different when you're in rooms or you're in situations or you have different friends where they're making more, maybe you're talking about maybe maybe you want to be an entrepreneur. You get more entrepreneur friends, they over there talking about, oh, how can I make more money in my business, or what kind of tax deduction can I get, or what have you. So it's just a whole different conversation than you would have had with people that weren't entrepreneur minded. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're building your circles, not saying that you get rid of your old friends and stuff,
Maybe.
because maybe.
If they still doing the
I
same
mean,
stuff, ain't trying to do that, hey, might be. This was fun.
maybe, but what I tell people is you can have different circles for different things. So I still have like my friends that I grew up with, we've been friends since like eighth grade or whatever, that's that crew. But then I also have my entrepreneur friends, and that's that crew. And then I also have, some other people, that's that crew. So you can have different circles for different things with what you're trying to accomplish. So don't don't take what I'm saying
Keep
to
them
be
all.
like, well, I need to cut off everybody because nobody's doing anything.
All new friends.
You don't have to go that extreme, but do put some people in your circle that are above where you're trying to go, whatever that goal is. So,
I love it. I am encouraged. I'm like, let me get some stuff
yay.
to negotiate my doggone self, because I'm definitely in lean times negotiate me a little certification, give me some letters behind my name and stuff like
Mhm,
that. So make sure that you're making a list of all the things. So if it's vacation time, if it's a
mhm,
certification, if it's a conference, if it is, some program at work, or, maybe you're not at the level where you can be in the mentorship or whatever program, child, that ain't it right. Like you can bypass that. Ask for that. So
Right.
make a list of the money stuff, but the non-money stuff
Mhm.
too. And see how you can make that happen. I'm encouraged. I hope y'all are
Yay.
encouraged. And then if they want to get in contact with you, Tiffany, how do they get in contact with you?
Yeah, so you can find me at moneytalkwitht.com, or you can check out the podcast. It's Money Talk with Tiff. And the premise behind the podcast is the way out of poverty is ideas. And so I'm trying to spread as many ideas as possible. I've interviewed people from all over the world doing all kinds of crazy things with their money, how they make, spend, invest, whatever they do. And that way, my goal is hopefully somebody listens to that and they're like, oh, I didn't know that was a thing. Oh, I like to write. I didn't know you can make $10,000 a month writing. And so, just trying to get ideas out there so more people can know what they can accomplish and then actually go forth and do it.
Perfect. So look her up, Money Talk with Tiff. Look up that podcast, listen to some episodes as
Yes.
y'all walking to work, as you're planning, as you're getting your day started, as you are getting the confidence to get to your next step and
Mhm.
dream even bigger. So, Tiffany, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And until next time, ladies, have a wonderful night. Please share your successes. I always love when you take this information and you apply it and you're like, I got some more money. I got
I
a
would
new
love it.
title, all that stuff. Let us celebrate with you too. So please be sure to let us know. And
Mhm.
until then, have a wonderful night.
Bye.